You know what? Today is a good day to talk about The Legend of Korra Season 4, the final season of this amazing series. But if you haven't watched it, there's going to be some spoilers ahead, so you should probably just watch Season 4 with me at the top of the screen and then come back. Okay, let's get into it. What's going on, you guys? James here with another real review, and yes, today we're talking all about The Legend of Korra Book 4 Balance. It is, well, it's been a very wild ride, hasn't it? A lot of emotions. I've cried, I've laughed, I've been speechless, I've slapped myself in the face while watching Season 4 with you. So guys, again, if you missed any of that, the reactions are floating around at the top of the screen, and if you want to see more reviews just like this, don't forget to hit the big red button below, subscribe to the channel, and tap on that bell so you don't miss out on any future Avatar content. I hear I need to read the comics, huh? I'll get on that. And if you haven't already, smash that like button and get loud in the comments below and let me know, guys, what did you think of Season 4, and go ahead and drop your rankings down below. Where does Season 4 fall for you? I'll tell you where Season 4 ranks for me at the end of this review, but for now, we're going to get into all of Season 4, guys. Again, spoilers are going to be thrown around everywhere, so if you have not seen the season, you might want to watch it before you watch the rest of this review. Guys, one word for this entire series is breathtaking. I didn't think that they would be able to pull it off after watching the magnificent Avatar: The Last Airbender, but they did. In a good way. Now, some ways it didn't work, in some ways it did, but let's not get negative and let's start with the positives. And right at the top of the list, guys, before we dive any deeper, is on a technical level. The action in this book was fantastic. It was on such a huge scale, and I love how in each season our villains have signature styles. Who can forget about Amon, who used his influence to turn the public against Benders and eventually Avatar Korra. Then there's Unalaq, who wanted to use Korra to open the portal between the spirit world and our world in order to, well, basically cause a lot of destruction. And then there's our boy Zahir, who went from long hair to no hair, but he used his airbending, his newfound airbending after Season 2 to really accomplish his goals, even though his goals were technically not wrong in a way, but the way he wanted to get there was just awful. And that reminds me of Kuvira, who had good intentions but not necessarily the right way of going about things. She used technology and engineering to create the Spirit Vine weapon, yes, but it was ultimately her dictatorship which helped create the Earth Empire. Guys, that would have been a whole mess, so thank goodness the season ended the way it did. There's also a beauty in the writing here. I think that Korra's complete character arc as a whole was beautiful, and it was handled with so much grace and care. I do love the fact that each book was titled differently, of course similar to Avatar: The Last Airbender, no surprise there, but each title in this series could really reflect on Korra's growth. So let's go through them. The first one being Air, because she needed to master bending as the Avatar. Then there's Spirits, well, because of Korra's showdown with Unalaq, and eventually the accomplishment of getting the spirit world and the real world to be in harmony with one another. And that led to change, because not only do the spirits now live in this world, but Korra had to face off against Zahir, who is arguably the strongest villain she ever had to square off against, guys. And maybe that's a video for another time, but Zahir changed the inner workings of Korra. Korra was once very strong, formidable, but then Korra was broken down by Zahir, and then of course came the trauma and the PTSD, which we will talk about as this review goes on. But man, Zahir changed the game for Korra. And then of course we have balance, where Korra and Kuvira both have the ideas of bringing balance to the world, quite literally, but not exactly in the right ways. Eventually Korra needed to find that balance in her own life between dealing with her past trauma and now continuing to be the avatar the world needs. So all of those elements just come together to paint a beautiful picture for Korra, a character that, yes, brought to life by Varney, who did an amazing job this entire season. And it's the character of Korra at her core, no pun intended, where it just drew me to her even more so, because she is just so strong, and you can tell that in Season 1 to Season 4 she's grown a ton, she's matured, and honestly she became the leader that we all knew she could be. I was rooting for her, and when I'm actively rooting for a character in a series, that's a job well done. Now in this season specifically, there were some important players that came back to help Korra, Zahir being at the top of the list, because if not for Zahir, Korra never really overcomes that last bit of her PTSD and trauma. That episode was just wild, guys. You saw my reaction. I was freaking out. On one hand, I do love it, because Zahir not only is a great character, but the fact that he kind of took a backseat to his own ego and said, I need to help Korra because I actually don't like Kuvira more, was kind of neat to see. It was definitely a surprise. But on the other hand, I don't think that victims of trauma and abuse need to go and face their abuser to overcome their own PTSD, experiences like that. They can do it on their own or with help of loved ones, but in this situation, I think it made sense and the writers made it make sense. So I did like it at the end of the day and thought it was a really good storytelling device. And then there's our girl Toph. Listen, throw one up for Toph. I did not expect to see her here again in book 4. Honestly, I thought it would be another flashback because up to this point, we had never seen present day Toph. And boy, yes, old, but she is so strong. And I love the fact that she was able to help Korra learn that she can take whatever's plaguing her out of her own body. She is strong. She's an individual with so much power. And Toph helped basically kick some sense into her. Toph, yes, a smart aleck, but I do love the fact that Toph reappeared again later on down the line to fight against Kuvira with her daughters. Alright, I'm not going to get emotional, but what I will say is that seeing Toph make good with Lin and Sue, it just made my heart beat a little bit faster, and it made it feel so warm. It was a great moment. And before I go on to the next point, what I will say is that this season dealt with a lot of trauma and PTSD as a whole, not only for characters like Korra, but also for Asami, who saw her father sacrifice himself, for example. This season is giving hope to the young boys and girls that watch this, and even for the adults that are picking up on this for the first time, like myself. It's really cool to see how Korra can overcome her burdens and obstacles with the help of loved ones, and by herself, she was able to find that strength inside of her. So this is just a great example of how a character can be so flawed in the beginning, but then at the end, show us why she is worthy of the title, like Avatar. Now, of course, we got to move on to Kuvira, who was a very formidable foe for Team Avatar, but it was the parallel between Korra and Kuvira that made all of the difference for me. At first, you guys know, I was denying the fact that Korra and Kuvira could be anything alike. We had, I believe, Bolin and Mako kind of have that discussion about why Korra and Kuvira could have that, similarity between one another, and I was denying it. I told myself, no way is this a possibility. Kuvira's evil, Korra's good, right? It's as plain as day. But it took me hearing it from Korra herself in that final episode where Korra and Kuvira are in the spirit world, and Korra tells Kuvira, I see a lot of myself in you. And that for me was a very humbling moment. Korra in season 1 was a bit careless, similar to Kuvira, and reckless in getting what she wanted. Now, Kuvira also had a temper, as well as Korra did when things didn't go her way. So you started to see the similarities between the two, and I did after I pulled back and got myself out of that Team Korra mentality. Now, when it comes to Team Avatar as a whole, this is the final season. I expected send-offs, and we did get some great send-offs, guys. Starting with Bolin, Bobo, Nuktuk, that is my homie. He has been my favorite character for so long in this show. It's always been between Bolin and Korra. I've loved them so much. Even Asami was thrown into the mix. But let me tell you about Bolin. The reason I vibe with him so much is because I saw a lot of myself in him. Bolin also really grew after being on Kuvira's side and then slowly realizing he was wrong and blinded. Opal pushed him to realize he is better than that. And I do like that they had some resolution. They didn't get the best moment together. I feel like they should have had another moment, and we'll talk about that as this review goes on. But I really, really love Bolin as a character, and PJ Byrne did an amazing job voicing this character. Now let's move on to his bro, Mako. Now Mako's character had to get humbled himself because at the beginning of the season, he was tasked with being Prince Wu's bodyguard, and he doubted the fact that Prince Wu could ever be a great leader. And what happened with Prince Wu? Well, that boy said, listen, I'm not only a singer, but I can definitely help out this world too. And he was able to show up in a great way, and eventually, of course, he makes Republic City more of a democracy in a way. So it was cool to see how Prince Wu grew, and so did Mako. And then there's the wonderful J.K. Simmons as Tenzin. I found Tenzin's final conversation with Korra to be one of the better moments in this entire season. Not only is it great to see Tenzin happy and probably the most content with how the world is shaping out to be that he's been this entire season, it was really cool to see him really feel joyous and proud. It was like a proud father moment. in that conversation. And it was nice to hear that Korra said she needed to go through true suffering to become more compassionate to people, including Kuvira. Listen, Tenzin just wanted Korra to be hopeful again, and hopeful Korra was. Just so beautiful. And now we gotta do the thing and talk about Varric and Julie. Yeah, they're definitely Team Avatar, especially after everything they went through with Korra and the gang. I love the fact that we ended it with their marriage. It was cool to see Pabu and Bolin as the officiants for the wedding, but most of all, I think it speaks volumes to how this series really was able to build a connection in such a short time, a romantic connection between Varric and Julie. The hints were always kind of there this season, but I love the fact that in 2 or 3 episodes, I felt so strongly about wanting them to get together and get married. It was nice to see everyone in one ceremony. It was a very beautiful ending to an otherwise very traumatic season. Oh, and shout out to Julie for saying, I am not an assistant anymore. That was such a strong moment, and I love Julie. I want her to be a leader one day of something. She deserves it. And guys, you're probably wondering what happened to me talking about Asami. Don't worry, we're getting into Asami right now, and you can't talk about Asami without talking about Korra. Now, let's pause real quick, not get into those two right away, but let's start with Asami as a character individually. I have been a huge fan of her for so long, and the voice acting by Seychelle Gabriel was just excellent. Asami is a very strong character. She's a very smart character, and honestly, internally, she's dealing with a lot, especially with the betrayal of her father, but she finally confronted what's been troubling her spirit by meeting with Hiroshi in prison. This was a huge step for her. She needed to overcome this past trauma and kind of turn a new page over in her life, and I love that. Of course, all of that was building towards Hiroshi's eventual sacrifice to help Team Avatar enter Kuvira's giant mecha, a moment that broke my heart. It was absolutely gut-wrenching to see Hiroshi say, I love you, Asami. Oh, goodness gracious, it's so good. Now, with all that being said, we need to get into Korra and Asami. We were teased with the idea of them being attracted to each other all season long. The letters Korra would write to Asami, the moment she blushed when Asami complimented her hair, I believe it was. And honestly, there are times where both of them together, it felt like almost they were the only two in the world. They confided in one another. So the way Asami looked at Korra and vice versa, it just led me to believe, oh my gosh, maybe there's a chance. And of course, we got that final moment with them where they go on this extended vacation in the spirit world. They hold hands, and it's suggested that they would probably kiss in that moment, but from what you guys told me, Nickelodeon censored it. So I infer that that's what happened, and man, I couldn't be happier for them. It's also interesting how the show begins with Korra feeling alone, and then ends with her being together with Asami, and most likely never feeling alone again. Alright guys, well, you know what? The time has come. We need to talk about what didn't work with book 4, because even though I did really like this season, it's not perfect, and unfortunately a lot of behind the scenes issues really hurt this show, especially in the middle. Now, it's no secret that Korra's final season had lots of production issues, and a lot of that was on full display with my least favorite episode in the series, Remembrances. It's a Clips episode, and while it is unnecessary, I now really understand why Brian Konietzko and Mike DiMartino, the showrunners for Legend of Korra and Avatar The Last Airbender, needed to make it. According to a letter from Brian himself, Nickelodeon slashed their production budget in half before season 4 even began and gave them an ultimatum. Either you make a Clips episode, or you don't, and you have to fire and lay off a lot of your cast and crew. That would be rough, and I'm glad that they said, no, we're going to value our crew, we're going to keep them on and make a Clips episode. It's not the worst thing I've ever seen, but honestly, after you guys saw my reaction, I was not vibing with that episode, and Remembrances really is forgettable. I almost wish they did have to make it, but again, they were held against their will. And then there's season 4 being released entirely online after a dip in ratings. I don't understand why. I get it that maybe it wasn't profitable for Nickelodeon to continue airing it live on TV, but it doesn't make sense to me. After setting up what was so beautiful in book 1, then you're going to continue in book 2 to keep it on air, and then if I'm not mistaken, book 3 and 4, they were released partially online before season 4 being released fully online. If I'm wrong, correct me in the comments, but what I will say is that it seems like a weird move. Just because Nickelodeon felt like a majority of the audience was watching virtually, digitally, online, that doesn't mean you put a show like The Legend of Korra online. It deserves to be aired on TV. And then there's the animation inconsistencies, budget cuts again being the common denominator, and the reason why this happened. There were so many times, especially in the Remembrances episode, where I felt like the animation was just so odd, and it felt lackluster to a degree after the bar that was set so high, especially with season 1. Now, season 2 was the first instance of this happening where they had to switch over animation studios, I'm guessing because of the cost of animation, and it looked really weird for the first half of season 2, but then it gradually got better. And in season 4, it felt like there were 2 episodes that I can remember. Remembrances, of course, and then another one towards the end, that final stretch of the season, where I felt like the animation became 2D, and it was just like a storyboard image kind of moved in a 3D way, and I didn't really like that too much. It took me out of episodes, and it was jarring to me as a viewer, so I can only imagine how it was for those who watched it live. So we had behind the scenes issues, and what else? Well, for me, I did not like how season 4 pushed aside some major characters that were given a lot of love in book 3. Again, I'd have to imagine that budget cuts were most likely the reason for not having enough screen time for some of these very important characters to Korra's story. We saw Jinora maybe once this season in a speaking role, and then after that, she was non-existent. And for me, it was such a minor moment in this season that I feel like she needed to get more love. She was given her tattoos at the end of book 3, propped up to be a major player in season 4, and then just kind of shifted to the side. I didn't like that too much. And then we got Kai, who just disappeared. We saw him maybe once this season, again in a non-speaking role. I don't get how you can start to build this relationship between Kai and Jinora, right? But on a brotherly level, we saw Kai and Bolin and even Mako kind of look after one another in a weird way in book 3, and none of that was explored in book 4. It just felt like, to me, why even introduce Kai and give him that much importance in book 3 if you won't continue that in book 4? And then my boy Tenzin took a huge step back this season, and it felt like, again, he was non-existent most of this season. Granted, he had that amazing moment at the end, and he had one bit of dialogue and remembrances that I can remember even being slightly impacting, but he wasn't given much to work with, and maybe that's a scheduling issue on J.K. Simmons' part, or, again, production budget issues. I know there's a lot to pack into one final season, and it can only be very tough for the writers. I can't even imagine, but it's just a shame because, man, we needed to see more of Tenzin. And then there's Opal and Bolin. How did we not get a full resolution with them? We could have at least seen them kiss on screen. And again, I had to just kind of assume that they were okay at the end of all of this, and that's a shame. And then the last negative I have for this season is, before the final 3 episodes, book 4 didn't necessarily give me final season vibes. There were lots of little teases at the end of episodes, and you guys saw it on my reaction. I was thinking, okay, next episode they're going to talk about this and address it. And they don't. They leave breadcrumbs up until that final stretch, but by then, I didn't necessarily feel like this was the final season of a very epic show. I wanted those vibes all season long. Didn't get that, so I'm wondering maybe if, again, production budgets are to blame, or it was just a writing error. I'm not sure. But overall, you guys, book 4 of The Legend of Korra was a beautiful final chapter. This is a show that for me is gonna live on forever. I want to show my kids The Legend of Korra one day. I want them to experience this show because the series is beautiful. Korra is an amazing character. It was just so well written from start to finish that I really fell in love with Team Avatar all over again. I do like the callbacks. I'm glad that this show did not lean on just bringing back Aang and Sokka and name drops like that, but instead it gave Korra her own story. One of the reasons I love Korra the most is because she is a strong woman, and we usually don't get lead women in animated shows like this. It's usually, guys that are kind of just like going out there and fighting the big bad dudes and they get all the recognition. But I really love the fact that Korra stood up for women everywhere, and she was able to display her growth season by season. Now, is book 4 a 10 out of 10? No, but do I still really love the direction they went in at the end of the season? I do, and I think that Zelda Williams deserves praise as Kuvira. It's just really cool to see how some old faces came back to play again. I do love everything that they built in Korra. The world building was so cool. I'm glad they introduced spirits, because that was one area that I felt like could have been explored even more so in Avatar: The Last Airbender, was the mysticism of everything. But here, man, it just works so well. It was executed very well, especially with the circumstances that the creators had to deal with in seasons 3 and 4. So now you're probably wondering, where does book 4 rank for me? Well guys, here it goes. This is my initial first impression of where I would rank season 4. For me, right at the top is book 1. I think that is the strongest season. It was definitely very consistent, and I feel like it just delivered an amazing blow, especially as a fan of The Last Airbender, and watching it 2 or 3 weeks after I took a break from Avatar. It was so cool to see how they built this world. And then the second favorite season for me was book 3. Just Zahir, a great villain, but what Korra had to go through was on a different level. There were a lot more layers to that storytelling. And then in third place is book 4. It's a great ending. I think that it just gave me everything I wanted with Korra and Asami, but more importantly, it gave me everything I wanted with Korra as a character. And then in last place, for me, is the very lopsided book 2. First half awful, second half pretty darn good. So I think book 2 could have been much better, but again, that is exactly where we start to see some inconsistencies in this series. But I want to know what you guys have to say about book 4 now that you know all of my thoughts on this season. Get a lot in the comments below. Let me see your rankings as well. And if you haven't already, guys, smash that like button and the big red button below. Stay subscribed to the channel. We're almost at 3,000 and it's all because of you. We got more reactions on the way, so tap on that bell so you stay notified anytime a surprise video drops and for more reviews in the future. Alrighty, y'all. Well, I might go and get started on the Dragon Prince now. I'm excited for that series. Again, thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you at the next screening.